Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. It's been 4 weeks since the New York Subliners won the World Championship, but we still only really know 4 of the top rosters going into next season. What are the biggest upgrades teams have made? Who's won Roster Mania? Those are the big questions that are being raised, but I'm pretty interested in what are the rivalries we're going to see for next year between these top 4 teams and the others that are being formed as well. We get some interesting insights into that on the Great 100 Thieves 0 to 100 episode they did last night. Lots to dive into. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. You can probably see just about behind me there on over my right shoulder this what is actually this when you look at it in closer detail. Bit of dust, but we got rid of that. So yeah, it turned up yesterday. So thanks to everyone for all the support in the channel over the last several years, and they sent out the 100k plaque. So that's on the wall behind me as a constant reminder. So it's actually kind of like, it's cooler than I thought it'd be, I'm not gonna lie. So thanks to everyone. This is not just my award, this is the award of the entire community that's managed to pull this off. So awesome to see, and let's just keep going, baby. So first of all, I wanted to dive into a little bit on what the future of the Call of Duty landscape might well be after this merger. aBeZy has been given lots of thoughts on this lately, of course. Founder, one of the early members of MLG, then into the Esports engine days, and just talking about how if Esports never went down the route of trying to be like regular sports, we could have been in a very different place. And even I saw JoeDeceives made a video on this as to whether Microsoft, after they make this acquisition happen, will decide, you know what, instead of us running the league as Activision Blizzard presently do, let's just hand it off to an Esports engine or some other tournament organizer to run the entire circuit in a similar way to what was done with MLG in the past. That would be very interesting. I have no idea what that would be for these CDL teams that have paid this $25 billion buy-in, but even the rumor was coming around relatively recently that a lot of those, whatever's outstanding, doesn't have to be paid anymore, is what was happening in Overwatch, and you might expect that could happen in the Call of Duty side as well. Also, there was some talk about whether we can actually get back to a promotion relegation style situation like we had when Wailers was actually competing in Call of Duty, when he was back in that Vitality team of the old school CWL Pro League days, and he actually played in challenges in fairness for a couple of years after that. But he moved over to Valorant, and there's very few players that I think can actually make that transition successful on a competitive level. Yesterday, his team, Gentle Mates, actually, I think I have the matchup right here. So they 3-0'd Ascends, and Wailers got absolutely cooked in the first series they played here, but they won this one 3-0, and that puts them into the grand final match. The way that the Valorant ecosystem works, there's the franchise league with 10 teams, in all that it says 10 teams per region around the world, and next year there'll be 11 teams, and it goes up until a maximum, I think, of 14. So every year they've got an Ascension tournament, which is effectively just to qualify. There's no relegation from the franchise league yet, but you can qualify through, and Wailers is on a team that's one match away from qualifying. I don't think they'll be the favourite in that qualification game, and he's not the best player on the team, but it's kind of crazy that they've actually made this work. So Wailers made the transition, playing on that French team, and is almost very close to qualifying for the proper franchise league in the Valorant side. And it's also raised some questions there, right, as to whether that Valorant model is just straight up better, right? Because Riot, I think, learns from what they'd done with League of Legends and some of the issues with the franchising situation they had over there, took that into Valorant, and maybe there's some lessons that the Call of Duty League can learn from this. Activision aren't going to change anything to this extent, but Microsoft might, and that's one of the questions that will be raised as and when that deal gets done. Let's mention this as well. So Jacob L comes out with pause to find next year's champs win. Who are we going to get? It's going to be OpTic Texas, baby. I think the first one I got was Vegas Legion we got right there. But also in the replies, we get Standy's mother's back on Twitter, and she drops this. Now, you know, we know how these esports parents are. They leak things all the time. I don't think she's necessarily leaked things. But you guys remember a couple of weeks ago now when Standy said, please, mum, get off Twitter. Please stay off Twitter. And then she deactivated her account. But she's back, thankfully. And we get more great stuff like this. So Rokkr, Standy was with Rokkr, right, for some time. There's maybe a chance that he could return over there. It's interesting to see because of the top 8 SMGs in the world, pretty much all of them are on the top 4 teams, to our understanding. You've then got to go down to what are the other SMGs with the highest upside. Standy is one, Huke is another, Afro is another, I think. There's a few in that category, but it's difficult to form a great team around that. And maybe Rokkr think, you know what, bringing Standy back, the success they had together might make sense. It also would align with this tweet that we saw, which may or may not be implying they're 4 players from these various rosters. Kind of funny as well, because when I talked about this the other day, I completely forgot the Los Angeles Guerrillas colours even exist, because technically there's 3 teams that are purple, right? There's Toronto, there's Rokkr, and there's LA Guerrillas. So technically, this purple circle could be referring to a JoeDeceives or an Arcitys or, you know, some player that was on that Guerrillas roster at the end of last season, but it also may certainly not be the case. And maybe this orange one is Standy from the Vegas guys. That might make sense. I guess we'll find out over the coming days here, but I wanted to dive into this great video that Thieves put out, the 0 to 100 episodes, the final one with this roster. Very emotional stuff here towards the end, especially when Octane was retiring, and obviously the guys knew it at the time, and it was his final ever event, and they'd not exactly gone out with a bang, had they, right? I mean, they just whimpered out top 8. They were a competitive series there. They nearly beat Surge, but it didn't happen. They lose to Toronto, lose to Surge, straight out of the tournament. I always enjoy seeing some of these like behind the scenes discussions here, because obviously the players respect each other a lot and have a great relationship, but it's always interesting to, you know, get a glimpse of some of the friction that occurs behind the scenes. We certainly get that here with Kenny and Envoy behind the scenes, and they will be playing on markedly different rosters going into next year.
What the fuck are we doing?
Maybe simplifying it is the wrong phrase.
But
that's the things.
I don't think it is. I don't think I'm not saying
the things you're explaining is what I'm talking about. I mean,
no, I agree.
I mean, isn't that shit we thought about though? To just push up on the map until the hilltops?
No. And like, I'm like, well, I'm literally listening to it back, and that's an issue. Because in my head, I feel like to make the game easier, if we're calling out a guy P2, there should be something done about it or something called that we're not doing anything about it. And that's what makes the game so much fucking easier. That's what I'm saying. That's simplifying the game. Because like, yo, are we killing this guy or are we not killing this guy? Calling him out does nothing for us. Because okay, he's P2. We know that. We've been knowing that for a fucking hour. But are we killing him or not?
I'm watching the cross from short, and we're just dying on the hill. Maybe you're gonna date it, whatever, but like we're just tweaking in comms of the most basic shit.
It happened both P4s.
I mean, isn't that shit we thought about though? To just push up on the map until the hilltops?
No.
2 kills. There's one guy at P3 and one guy at P2.
Did I know he was P3? Did you know he was P3?
Yes, they spawned there. What do you mean? Sam spawned behind you.
Okay.
Do we not know fucking spawns?
Yeah, well, I don't know spawns.
Yeah, going into champs after losing to Toronto in a game 5, it was very different than champs the year prior, where we had won a game 5 round 11 in round 1 of champs. So tensions were very high. Me and Ken really just popped off on each other.
I developed a relationship with Dill that like I cherish to the highest, because like once again we didn't like each other for the longest time, but we started teaming, and then like now we just became like best friends and one of our brothers. Like I feel like me and him, it was a completely different relationship than me with all the other 2, because like I said before, we were the more hothead, more heated people on the team, and I feel like we were able to like push that aside a lot of the times and, you know, get better.
You know, players get heated at each other. You know, coaches yell at players, players yell at players, players yell at coaches. It's just the dynamic of it. And if you're soft and you can't, you know, take it, then I guess you're not truly built for it.
Now what? Yo, see you on land, motherfuckers.
So the guys on this team obviously have a great relationship, having teamed together for a long time at this point, and I'm sure they would love a world in which like everything was fine and dandy, they could keep on playing as a team. But maybe they don't wanted to make changes anyway, to be honest, right? They weren't having the success at the end of last season. Octane was going to go anyway. I think they'd have made changes probably regardless of the circumstances this off-season, but clearly with Thieves' budget cuts and other teams still offering big money, all of those guys are going their separate ways, including even Kenny, which is still crazy to think how closely linked he's been to this organization, but yeah, not the case any longer. So I wanted to look at some of the rivalries that we might have next year, right? So obviously Kenny and Envoy, they, as Kenny mentioned in the clip, they used to not particularly be a big fan of each other back in the day. They then teamed up. This is on Team Justice, I believe, way back in the Advanced Warfare days, before the age restriction kicked in, which kicked them out for a few years. Envoy could only come back in the Black Ops 4 days. Kenny was slightly older, so he could come back slightly earlier than that. Great teammates, of course, on the Thieves days in recent times, and this is just another image of these guys back in the day before, you know, they're like 15, 16 or whatever, before the age restriction came into effect in Black Ops 3, when the CWL Pro League came around, and the likes of TJ Halley and Huke and all these other guys were effectively forced to wait on the sidelines for their turn to come around, and as Thieves say farewell to all of these fellas. So they'll be on different teams. Octane's not going to be there anymore, unfortunately. He'll be commentating from the sidelines, but there's going to be some great matchups between these guys, because yes, there's respect between the 3 of them, but they'll all want to prove that they made the best decision as to which rosters they're going to go to. Drazah especially, given that we believe that Drazah had an OpTic, opportunity that he then decided to go to FaZe. We don't know for sure. Difficult to say what was actually happening there behind the scenes as to whether Drazah actually did get that OpTic offer and whether he was just waiting around and then went to the FaZe guys instead. But I think he probably made the correct decision on this one. It unfortunately does deprive us of one of the best rivalries in the scene though, which was Drazah versus FaZe and Thieves versus FaZe in general. We're going to need another team to step up into that Thieves category because there were some great rivalries between Thieves and the other organizations around. Thieves versus FaZe obviously was a massively big one. Drazah versus those guys, there was all sorts of beef going on there. And if they now team up, you lose a bit of that. But in the same way that last season when Slasher went to join those guys, even Slasher, Cellium, those guys had a fair bit of a back and forth before they teamed, and then that kind of disappeared when they teamed. So unfortunately, the Drazah versus aBeZy thing is probably going to calm down a fair bit as a result of this. But then again, with Slasher leaving FaZe, if he especially teams up with Priester, that's going to be a great rivalry. Because let's say they join Boston or Minnesota or Surge or something like that, and Slasher, Priester, a team of two. Whenever they play FaZe, Slasher will obviously want to prove that they made the wrong call dropping in for Drazah, and whenever they play the subliners, Priester versus New York next season, if this team comes through, is going to be fantastic to witness how that goes over the course of the year. So those are some additional good ones, but even between these four teams, if these are the teams that are formed, because everyone's been saying, okay, who's won Rostermania? I'd argue that probably all of these teams may have got better. I'm not so sure about New York, to be honest, whether this is actually going to be an improvement or not. I think FaZe have probably got marginally better. I think that OpTic have improved, and Toronto have certainly improved as far as I'm concerned, with Envoy coming in for Hicksy in this case. But a lot of the great rivalries of next year are still going to be maintained, right? Like OpTic and FaZe, that's still going to be fantastic. Toronto and OpTic as well, I think gets even better in some respects, because OpTic and Toronto have always, just from an organizational level, have always had a nice, since Cold War really, right? You guys probably remember, if you're OpTic fans, you will remember the Cold War season when Toronto with CleanX and Insight, different team, Bance and Cammy at the time, but they would always beat OpTic Game 5, and it was a rivalry that OpTic and Toronto would always find a way to match up against each other. Toronto would always win Game 5, and it was a dagger to OpTic fans. And still, whenever OpTic play Toronto, it's a great matchup. You've got Scrappy there, big personalities on both sides. That's going to be a great one still. And now you add Envoy into the mix, former OpTic player, that was potentially in discussions with OpTic. Let's not forget here, right, that Envoy was early days in talks with OpTic. They obviously decided to go for Pred instead. Maybe there's part of Envoy that thinks, well, maybe they should have got me back. Who knows? But that's going to be a good one to look for. And then you've also got the Kenny and Envoy thing in addition. And look, we saw the clip and pretty spicy stuff, but this type of stuff happens, right, all the time behind the scenes between the pro players. There's nothing like in it in terms of drama between those as individuals. They get on as friends and certainly teammates inside the game. But still, when you've got a team that breaks apart, they all go their own separate ways. They'll all want to prove that their team's the best out of all of them, and that I'm the better player than you, I was the bigger reason than you were why we won, and all this type of stuff. So I think it's going to be some additional great rivalries there between FaZe and OpTic, and between Ultra certainly and those guys, and New York maybe to some degree as well. I mean, New York versus Toronto is still going to be great because you've got even more Scrappy versus Kismet action, right? We saw at the end of last game when Scrap was like, without Hydra, they're nothing, and then Kismet put him down hard in the finals. So we're going to have more of that. So really, across all of these top teams, there's going to be some great stuff happening. But even outside of it, as I say, with the Slasher and Priester thing, if that's a team or two, will be very exciting. So very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comment section below. Just want to close out with this, but I'm not going to make any comment on it. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.